Let's call the meeting. I guess, good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the February 1st, 2022 Indiana Recycling Market Development Board meeting to order. Good morning, and I do apologize for not personally being in attendance, but situations require me to kind of stay isolated as best I can. First order of business is to convene and welcome. Deanna.
Thanks, Bruce. I'm going to go ahead and go through our Zoom procedures for those that are online today via Zoom. So thank you for joining us today. I am Deanna Garner, Recycling Market Development Program Manager for Items Office of Program Support. All microphones are currently muted. For attendance tracking, please take a moment to write your name and affiliation in the chat box. We will be taking questions and comments from the public at periodic times throughout the event. All participants will be able to unmute themselves and ask questions and make comments at the appropriate times. If using the chat box, please direct the messages to all or myself, Deanna Garner, instead of the item communications. If you have a question or technical issue during the presentation, you would chat that to item communications or use the raise hand and chat features. To access that raise hand and chat feature at the bottom or top of your screen, depending on your device, you'll see a menu bar. You may have to move your mouse or touch your screen for the menu bar to pop up. In the middle of that menu, there's a chat icon, which you can click on to show the chat dialog. You should also see the raise hand option. Please utilize the raise hand or chat features if you have any questions or comments, and you'll be called upon at the appropriate time. For those on the phone, if you have a question or comment, you can raise your hand by pressing *9, and we will call on you at the appropriate time. When called upon, you'll need to unmute your phone by pressing *6. For everyone present via Zoom in today's meeting, please identify yourself when speaking. If any members of the media have joined us, please utilize the chat feature or email media@idem.in.gov if you have any questions or if you would like to schedule an interview. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on IDEM's website, recycle.in.gov. And with that, I'll turn the meeting over to Board Chair Bruce Burrow, who will be leading today's meeting.
Good morning, everyone. Once again, the first order of business is consideration and approval of the October 21st, 2021 RMDB meeting and transcripts. Has everyone had the opportunity to review the transcript?
That's a very quiet yes.
Yes. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion. It's Craig.
And who is that motion from, please?
Craig Lutz. I'll make the motion.
Craig Lutz, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Lutz. Do I have a second?
I'll second. Kelly.
Second by Ms. Weger. Any discussion? We can do a roll call vote. Matt Gratz?
Yes.
Yes. Terry Guerin? Debbie Hackman?
Debbie is not here yet. She is stuck in traffic.
Okay, Craig Lutz?
Yes.
Andrew Noonan?
Yes.
Kelly Weger?
Yes.
Kelly, is your name pronounced Weger or Weger?
Weger.
Weger, I apologize. Tara Wessler Henry?
Yes.
Sandy Whitehead?
Yes.
Doesn't miss anyone. With that, the motion carries. The Next item on the agenda is the IDEM update. I'll turn that over to Deanna.
And I'm going to turn it over to our Assistant Commissioner, Julia Wickard.
Okay, and I'll remember to talk to the owl, because
Yes.
if I don't talk to the owl, I'm talking to the screen and you see the side of my face. So, so good morning. Thank you everyone for joining, both here in the room and online. Appreciate everyone doing that. I'm excited to introduce to you our new commissioner, not new to IDEM, not new to state government, certainly understands the lay of the land. Brian Rockensus was our former chief of staff. He was just recently appointed by Governor Holcomb after Bruno Pigot's departure to the US EPA. And really excited to be able to work alongside Brian. He brought me on board, so I'm eternally grateful for him. And excited that he understands the purpose of this group, the purpose of IDEM, our roles in air, land, and water management. And so without further ado, I'll introduce to you our new commissioner, again, not new to IDEM, Brian Rockensus.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me. Deanna and Julia were really interested for me to come today and give a kind of update and a brief explanation of what I'm interested in this year. And so I'll kick it right off. There's 5 topics I'm really interested in trying to tackle or work towards tackling this year. One of them is the topic of this year's legislation, and I'll go over that as well. It's solid waste. Since March, I've been receiving numerous phone calls or meetings with different companies or different industries who are having issues or misunderstandings of solid waste and what kind of permitting they need and how they should be regulated. And most of it has to do with reuse or recycling of material and putting it back into productive use, whether it's steel or wood or shop dust or whatever it is. I had more conversations about solid waste in a 4 or 5 month period than I have in the 8 years I've been at IDEM. So I knew there was an issue. And so I started working towards that before Bruno left. And then obviously it's going to be one of the things I focus on. I'm looking at ways to create a lower level of permitting for people that are trying to use single stream recycling, whether they're trying to reuse steel in a process or reuse telephone poles for some purpose. Right now, there's 2 avenues. There's legitimate use, or there's a solid waste processing permit. And most of these folks fall under the solid waste processing permit. The problem is it's a $12,000 permit, and many of these people are small mom and pop. They found a niche in a market and they're really trying to get going. And also the regulation itself is it's heavy regulation because it's meant for big, heavy industry. And I don't think these folks are necessarily fit that mold. So I've convened a solid waste work group that many folks are sitting on. And Cal Davidson from Raise Trash and Bruce Palin, former Assistant Commissioner for Office of Land Quality, are hosting that for me. And they are walking through with everybody on the call what that kind of regulatory scheme could look like. What kind of lower level permitting and what does that mean look like to allow a lot of these folks to continue doing what they're doing, which is important, but making sure that we do have some kind of oversight so that we don't end up with a bunch of open dumps, which is my biggest concern. So that's item number 1. Number 2 is trying to tackle lead sites, lead contaminated sites. There's a number of lead sites in the state. Some are in programs. They're in state cleanup. They're in Superfund, or voluntary remediation program is another one. But there are also sites that just kind of fell out of both regulatory schemes between IDEM and EPA. So really trying to leverage EPA and the dollars that they're sending the states, because there's a lot of money coming, to help communities clean up some of these sites. It's not good for anybody to live on a lead contaminated site, and many of these folks live in what is considered environmental justice communities, so it's even more important from that aspect to get moving and cleaning these sites up. That leads me to environmental justice. That's been a huge topic of conversation in the environmental world. Specifically, states are all trying to figure out what we need to do to work with EPA and make sure that they're accepting of whatever we're putting out, whether a permit's being challenged or an enforcement action is being challenged. We're trying to make sure that what we're doing is reasonable in their eyes and in the community's eyes. And so to give a little background, Michigan has received 6 Title VI complaints. There may be actually more now, but as of a month ago, they had received 6. Title VI is the Civil Rights Act. So they're tying permit compliance and permit issuance with the Civil Rights Act. They're saying, communities are saying that I'm not being treated fairly because of my race, my ethnicity, my religion, etc. Because I'm living in a location that's super contaminated, nobody's dealing with it, and it's not fair that somebody else in another community gets to live free and clear from contamination. And so that's something EPA is tackling with speed. And so I'm just trying to figure out from the state perspective, what does that mean for us? How do we make sure we can continue getting permits out on time in real time, while also tackling the community's needs and interests? And so we have received a letter from a community group in East Chicago. They wanted, well, EPA received it, and now we're working jointly with EPA. And they are wanting a environmental assessment. What does the air, land, and water look like in East Chicago prior to renewing some permits, which is even a little bit more different than like Michigan. Michigan's, we're all new permits that were being contested. So a renewal puts another spin to it because we don't, they've been there, a lot of these companies have been there for a long time. What do we do? How do we address that situation? So that's an issue we're working through. And then another really important thing that Bruno started, but I'm certainly continuing, is we teamed up with the Department of Homeland Security, and we're going to be collecting PFAS material from fire stations. There's a real risk to firefighters for cancer. And so Homeland Security wanted to really do this for those communities, and we joined with them. And it's a great initiative. It's one of the governor's initiatives for 2022, which I'm extremely proud of. And we got the RFP out of the door. Julia and Bob were really key in making sure that got out. And then we're hopefully going to start picking this stuff up in April, late March, early April. And then finally, something that I'm really trying to tackle is our air program fees. Our air program by the Clean Air Act has to fund the program by Title V fees. That's the permit fees. Those permit fees have to cover every aspect of that program. It's unlike any of our other programs. So 2 years ago, they raised fees. I think it was 27% raise. They raised us $2 million. That put us from 9 million to 11 million. 11 million is about what we need to run the program. Within a year, that money was gone. The problem with the air program is their fees are based on emissions. And as emissions go down, our funding goes down. So we're back to a place that we were prior to even raising fees. So I'm not interested in going back to the board. We can't actually for another 3 years for a fee increase. But I am interested in looking at how are those fees calculated? can we get them away from emissions so that there is some stable fee base, so that our program can run appropriately? Because we still have, even though the emissions are going down, which is great, we have to do all the same work that we had to do before. We still have to permit, we still have to inspect, we still have enforcement and air monitoring that we have to do. So those are the 5 things I'm really working to tackle this year. They'll probably take more than a year, especially like the lead contamination stuff, but those are all topics important to me. On the legislative front, there is House Bill 1226, which I'm sure many of you have tracked. There's 4 parts to it. There's a part that has to do with complaint on legitimate use. There's a piece that says if I have a hazardous waste permit, I don't need a solid waste permit. There is a piece that says that the Environmental Rules Board has to adopt the 2018 solid waste rule, the federal rule. And then there's a pilot program that would inevitably run through this board for funding to, I think, the Indy area and the surrounding communities, for some kind of pilot project to force recycling of some kind of material, some single stream, I believe. So the pilot project is the only thing in the bill that I really like right now. The rest of the items in the bill need some work to make the agency comfortable with where the bill's going. I certainly understand the complaints that some of the folks that brought these issues to represent Speedy have, but I know we're actively working to address those issues, and so hopefully that can resolve some of the problems we have with this bill. So that's
And it
kind
just
of,
moved out of the House.
it just moved out of the House. It's on the way to the Senate, and Senator Messmer will be the he's a Senate environmental chair, but he'll also be the sponsor of the bill. So with that, that's kind of my updates, quick and brief. Happy to answer any questions, and I really appreciate the time, Chairman Burrow and members of the board.
Thank you, Mr. Rogan. We appreciate you joining us today. I know you've got a very busy schedule, and certainly appreciate your time. And once again, I do apologize for not being there in person.
Ruth, I think we might have a question here in the room.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just curious on you mentioned that this big increase in inquiries regarding the solid waste streams. Do you think driving, what has changed that all of a sudden there's a lot of that coming in?
There's a number of things that have changed. It started 2 or 3 years ago when China stopped accepting waste, and then other countries followed suit. So the waste is not moving out. You have a number of major companies, you name them, Cummins, Rolls-Royce, John Deere, whoever, who really want to put sustainability and zero landfill next to their name. And so, and a lot of that has to do with the stuff not moving out of the country anymore. So there are a bunch of people that are taking this material and repurposing it for other things. I brought telephone poles. There's a company, they have a relationship with power companies. When telephone poles are not able to be used anymore, they cut them down and they make them fence posts for farmers. We're not involved in that piece. If they can't make them for fence posts because of the damage somehow, they shred them. And then they actually sell that material to landfills, and the landfills put it over as cover so people can drive on the landfill without getting so muddy. Shredding that material means you need a permit from us because you changed the composition of the material. He's a small company, he's a small guy. He thought he was reading the regs right. We got a complaint through somebody, so we inspected, and he was in violation. And that's where a lot of these are coming in. We get a complaint from somebody, we go and inspect. They thought they were doing the right thing. They don't have a permit. They need some kind of permit. And so what I'm trying to create is a lower threshold for a lot of these people that they're single stream. They're not dealing with a bunch of like municipal waste or they're literally single stream. So, yeah. We have that kind of permitting in all of our other permitting fields. You look at air permitting, based on your emission levels, you get different level permits, and wastewater, it's the same thing. So I thought it was a good idea, and I could be wrong, and we'll see, to create a multi-tiered permitting structure.
I just want to point out that it does affect a lot of our grantees directly, this definition. Because our grantees do the shredding, which changes the material, and it by definition that it currently is, then it becomes a solid waste, even if it's going for reuse, as Brian mentioned. Yeah, it's an important one to follow and kind of, I think there's a lot of good people on the work group, so hopefully we'll get a good resolution.
We have any other questions for Mr. Rockins from the board members? What about from the audience? We get into, can we expand upon House Bill 1226 a bit, please? And
Sure.
give us the major components of that.
Sure, so there's a piece of the bill, there's a pilot, if you look at the bill, the pilot program is divided into two sections. It's in the very first section and then the very last section. And then right after the pilot program is the piece that I talked about that was a legitimate use complaint. It says, it creates an exemption for solid waste that has been discarded, but then is used in a manufacturing process or used in some other creation of another product or something like that. And then there's amendment on that in committee last week. There's amendment 3 that listed a bunch of different things in the amendment. And I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to narrow the world that this exemption would apply to. But I think they caused more confusion with the amendment because they listed a bunch of things that are already exempt. So now it looks like it's a double negative that it was exempt and now it's not. And that wasn't their intent. And so that will be cleaned up hopefully in the Senate. The issue that I think that the agency has with that language is anybody can claim that something is an ingredient in a process or in the creation of a new product. And that's fine, that's great. The last thing I want to do is get in the way of ingenuity. The problem is, as an agency, we have seen time and time again where people have these great ideas and they don't work out. And then they leave. And what ends up happening is the city or town ends up having to clean up that mess. And with the help, obviously, of the waste industry, that the landfill guys and the trash guys, but that's a huge toll on those communities. And it's frankly illegal. You can't have open dumps in the state, and that's what that creates, is an open dump. So I get his the particular interest, but I want to make sure it's couched in a way that we're not just having open season for people to start collecting material all over the state and then nothing happens with it. And there's a difference, I think, and it's not really talked about in the bill, between somebody who pays for their material to make a new product and somebody who is being paid to take material. Whether that guy who's being paid to take material makes another product or not, he's still getting paid. So if his innovation fails, he's still getting money in the door. The guy who's paying to take the material has incentive to then go and make the new product because he needs to sell that product to make money. So that's the issue that I have with that language. Then the next part is if you have a hazardous waste permit, you don't need a solid waste permit. I don't necessarily disagree with that idea. And the rules currently say if you have a hazardous waste permit, you don't need a solid waste permit, but you gotta handle all the solid waste as hazardous waste. And so the particular industry that's interested in this language, they sometimes get truckloads of solid waste and they keep it separate from the hazardous waste. And their issue is, I don't want to treat something more restrictive if I don't have to, and if I'm not commingling it. And so I get that in concept. We provided them language that allows them to have that single permit, but puts parameters around it. So that, and it's not that particular group that I'm worried about, it's anybody else dealing with hazardous waste that may not be as sophisticated, but that puts parameters around it so that it says, you gotta keep the solid waste separate. You can't commingle the waste. If you commingle it, you have to treat it as hazardous waste. It just puts a little bit of a structure behind it rather than, if I have this permit, I don't need any other permit. You can compare that to if I have it's a stretch, but if I have a water permit, I don't need a waste permit. Well, no, that doesn't really work that way. The permits act differently for different reasons. And so hopefully that one gets resolved, because I think the language we provided them gives them what they want and also gives us a little bit too. And then finally, there's the portion of the bill that tells the Environmental Rules Board to adopt the 2018 solid waste rule and solid waste for the purposes of hazardous waste. The real issue in that is secondary hazardous materials, byproduct of hazardous waste. It's byproduct of processing hazardous waste. Those materials can then be transferred for further processing and then sold accordingly. Only 14 states have adopted that rule. And it's because the regulatory structure forces the generator to be the regulator on whoever they're sending that material to. And that's, I mean, most states would say that's not a good way to structure regulation. Because if the generator doesn't do it, nobody knows. The generator probably wouldn't want to do that because it's a burden on them. And then you have secondary hazardous people, handlers or processors, who the agencies now don't know exist until they're already up and running and processing this stuff, but we don't know if they're doing it properly. Obviously, you know, I'm not trying to take a heavy-handed approach that we need to regulate everybody to the nth degree, but we did put out that rule for second notice. So in the Environmental Rules Board rulemaking, there's first notice that tells everybody we're going to do a rule. Second notice actually puts out the language. So we put out the language. We adopted 2018 rule, but we have a little bit of a caveat in there where we take the onus off that generator and we do some of that work for the generator. And the way it's written currently is a shall provision. I think we're going to end up amending it to maybe a may provision. The generator can do it. But you know, if we do it, then we're certifying people that they've done it correctly and we know what's going on. So it provides incentive really rather than a hammer. So we'll see if that's workable or not. I mean, if that language ends up in the bill, it is what it is. We're going to end up we should be adopting the 2018 rule with that caveat in some form by the end of the year. So it's going to occur regardless. And then there's the pilot program. The pilot program is really looking to, I think the initial conversation I had was about glass, diverting glass away from landfills, diverting glass from other processes. And from my conversations with different groups, they all hate glass. Glass is destructive. Racetracks, for example, when it gets in the belts, it ruins the belts quickly. It's like sand. It turns into sand and then it damages the belts. So they hate dealing with it. Covanta hates dealing with it. other groups hate dealing with it. So diverting glass to industries in the state that could use it would probably be a great thing. Now, how that ends up is, there's other people maybe in the room that can talk to that pilot project in particular, but I know it's gonna go through the board. They're requesting $4 million from the RMDB fund. And on that fund, there's about 11 million or so in the fund. We get 2 million or so a year, and we spend about 1.5 to 2 million depending on the year. So that 11 million either grows or stays stagnant continually. So in my conversations with the group interested in the pilot project, I said, sure, use some of that money. It's for recycling purposes. It goes towards the mission of the board. You're going to go through the board for some kind of approval. It allows us to spend a little bit more of that money that is sitting there, which I know has been a piece of contention over the years. So that's kind of what I know about the bill. Happy to answer any questions. Oh, happy to try to answer any questions.
So I'm Craig Lutz with Republic. Going on that pilot program, I guess that some of that definition and some of the wording is confusing. And it's got, contamination of different things. But when you look at it, when you look at kind of programs that are currently in play, that are currently going on in the counties and the sounds that were defined, I guess that's where some of that confusion plays and the contamination plays is there's, for the last, 15 years, there's been recycling programs and there's sustainable, durable programs that are currently in play. And the fear of this and how the wording is, because it talks about, waste and waste diversion, and it talks about commodity. And I think it's trying to use those three terms with the same, on the same type of a product.
Right.
My fear, I guess, is if this goes through and it's the way the definition is the current programs are in play, how does the public look at that? How does the public look at when you have solid waste districts currently that do a source separation or a single stream type program, and now we're doing something that says you can take everything together and send it there, and it's like, well, I fear we're falling into a wish cycling type definition, and that's going to be confusing to the public. And I hope that those durable programs are not impacted.
Right, and I have had conversations with some folks about that. And to the, to the support of the bill, I'm supportive of the idea of that piece. How the language ends up is, it's not my bill. It's not Item's bill. Kind of agnostic to the whole thing. The idea of getting more money out for recycling efforts, I thought was a great idea. Sure. But to your point, I think there is going to be some tightening language in the Senate for the idea of there are already companies and industries that recycle certain things. And it is not necessarily proper to subsidize a whole different thing to take away the money from those companies. There should be some kind of open market competition like there is today. And so I do think that there will be some tightening of that language to narrow it, whether they narrow it to glass or whether they put in language that they got to fix the terms, like you said, but there might also be language to say, okay, applicant, you have to certify to IDEM before it goes to the board that this isn't a stream that's already being utilized by X industries. I didn't think about that, but when it was brought up to me, I thought that, yeah, that's probably good to tighten up. Yeah.
I'm Debbie Hackman. I'm from the Jackson County Solid Waste District. And I looked at it like Craig did. But one thing about that bill is it mentions in the pilot project, it mentions the central Indiana. It's specific, it looks like specific for a certain geographic area. And we know that the central part of Indiana doesn't have solid waste district, doesn't have a a funding mechanism in place to get their recycling countywide. Is this geared toward financing that project? Because I don't see that Jackson County could create that type of diversion that you would see in or any other county, not just Jackson.
I think the initial impetus was to get Indianapolis to do something a little different. To whether it's, one idea that was floated was get the convention center and hotels around it to start collecting differently, so that that diversion could go to the companies in Indiana that need it, whether it's glass or whatever else. So the focus initially was Indianapolis. I think it was amended in committee to involve the donut counties as well. But it is only meant to be a pilot. I don't intend or hope that this is going to be funded through RNDV forever. Like, they're gonna have to find their own funding, whether that's lobbying the legislature during the budget session for funding in another way. This was just to get that idea off the ground and see where it goes, and then they can make a pitch after that on where they're gonna get their funding. Because if it ends up being 4 million, after 2.5 years, the fund's bankrupt, and I'm not willing to do that.
Mr. Hawkins, this $4 million is not going to impact the amount of money available for the board to provide grants for innovation and development projects, is it?
No, it is not. There's about 11 or so million in the fund. Deanna could probably correct me.
Grant's gonna tell us.
Yeah, we'll have the
Grant-
slide in
Grant
a
will be
couple
on in a minute to
seconds.
tell I know we bring in just north of 2 million. It's like 2,100,000. Some years it might be 2,500,000 other years. And typically, at least more recently, in the last 5-6 years, we've done 1.5, $1 or $2 million a year. So we're covering what we give out every year, and just what we're bringing in. So it would affect the balance of the fund, but it won't affect, if we continue down the $2 million trajectory, it won't ever impact that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions from board members?
Real quickly, I didn't want to do this before she came, but also, we have a new chief of staff. Her name's Pravani Stover. She's
Hi, guys.
over on
I
the
got
wall here.
lost.
And she started in January and is new to the environmental world. So she's drinking from a rather large fire hose right now, but she's not new to state government. And I'm really excited for her to be on my team and help move item forward.
Very good. And thank you for joining us today in this meeting. Anything else from any of the audience members? Do we have any questions out in the chat box, Deanna?
No,
All right.
I think, or Julia, do you still have a few updates?
I just
you
have a
wanted to
couple
share?
updates and
Thank you
then,
all.
thank
Thank
you,
you.
Brian.
Thank you,
Thanks
sir.
for coming. Thanks, Ronnie. Just a couple updates. Happy February. This is, I can't believe we're in the second month of the year. It's hard to believe. We opened up our Governor's Awards for Environmental Excellence yesterday. So those are on our website, and we will be receiving those applications through April 4th. And then ultimately, there'll be 7 award categories as we've had in the past. And then we will present the winners, introduce the winners at our Partners for Pollution Prevention Annual Conference, which is, this is their 25th anniversary. So we're really excited about that on September 21st. So put that date in your calendars. Hopefully all of you can attend our P2 conference. And we have asked you to help amplify the Governor's Awards communications that went out as well. Our community recycling grant program is doing very well. It's under new leadership. Jennifer Hellreigel is our new grant coordinator for that program. She's not new to state government. She just moved positions. She was our environmental education director. But we're really excited. We received 23 applications for that grant program, totaling a little over $680,000. We've approved 19 of those applications for about $462,000. We're currently still in the process of doing final evaluations, but we'll be able to get grants in the hands of elementary schools, cities, solid waste management districts, universities, and nonprofits, and most likely the Indiana State Fair as well. So more details coming on that, but excited about our partnership with the Indiana State Fair. Our e-cycle program, electronic recycling, is doing great things as well. All of the reports for 2021 and 22, the 2021 annual reports and the 2022 registrations are all due March 1st. So if you have people in your communities, helping remind them would be good. We've collected 43 collector recycler reports so far. We have 8 manufacturer reports. We have a lot of internal and external interest in e-waste. We did an electronics recycling, as you know, last year. Most likely we'll repeat something like that this year on the Indiana State Government campus. And our e-waste coordinator makes regular visits to solid waste management districts. So we're doing a lot of outreach with our e-waste program. We also have a lot going on with and Tom Lees could talk at length about our metrics and the way we monitor what's happening at the EPA level. We actually responded to the National Recycling Strategy, talking about, kind of taking action on the National Recycling Strategy. So excited that IDEM's been at the table, engaged and a part of that. And if you visit our website, our recycling website, we've got a lot of updated information, charts and images that truly show what we're doing with Indiana recycling. So I could go on and on. Our team's in the room. We've got a lot of balls we're juggling, but really proud to work with Pat and Deanna and the team here, Tom Lees and Kristen Coasters. Trish Tennis is in the back, our newest addition to the team, our administrative assistant that's just digging in and doing great stuff. So really appreciate her work as well. So I'd be glad to answer any questions. I'm trying to talk to the owl. Hi, owl.
Do you have any questions for Julia? Hearing none. Thank you very much, Julia, for the update. Exciting times moving forward. Next item on the agenda is the status update of existing grants. I believe that was you, Deanna.
Finance update real quick first. Skipped one, Bruce.
Grant Geis is on the phone or on the screen. I don't know how many of you may have met Grant. Grant is our CFO, our Chief Financial Officer for IDEM. And I know he has some slides to share that will kind of walk through kind of the lay of the land for the RMDB. And Grant, we really appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. I'm very glad to be here. Good morning, happy February, everybody. As Julia mentioned, my name is Grant Geis, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer with IDEM. I also apologize for not being there today. I had some other things on the schedule, so for each of those, I just decided to do it from my office. So here to answer any questions, but as Julia mentioned, do have a few slides to go through. I believe at the end of the presentation, I'll open it up for questions, but there's some clarification that you guys need throughout the presentation. Please don't hesitate to raise your hand or communicate via the chat to ask some of those questions. So I'll go ahead and get started. So I think usually we tend to do this once a year, just kind of a high level financial overview the budget as well as the revenue that's collected in regards to the solid waste management fund as well as the recycling promotion and assistance fund. So on the first slide, Deanna, if you can go ahead.
Yeah,
We're trying to get it up.
just pause for 1 second.
They're on her laptop, but not on the screen.
There we go. We got it.
You're
It's
doing
on the Zoom.
It's on the Zoom, okay, and then I need to probably, how do I also share it on the?
Just go to your Zoom.
So yeah, just open the Zoom window back up. And just, okay.
Yep.
Top left.
Should be down on the bottom on the path further on your laptop screen.
This one? Clicking on Zoom.
Need to drag it over to the other screen.
Wondering, but it's not even showing.
It's not on your laptop screen.
On my laptop screen.
Can you drag it from the laptop to the other?
Why is my mouse all of a sudden? Yeah, when it was working a second ago.
Try using paper on it, your mouse, sometimes that helps me.
It's like the display settings decided to go wonky.
Yeah.
No.
Here, the mouse is there. You gotta go up.
Morning.
You saw the mouse?
Yeah.
One of the best things is once we all be comfortable working with Zoom, WebEx, Teams, you name it, yeah, hopefully the pandemic will be over and we can all meet in person.
Your screen share is paused, but I can't even get over there to control any of it.
Her mouse will go to her laptop.
Deanna, do you want me to try to share my screen? I had the
Yeah.
presentation.
Yes. I have to stop share is my only problem and no. What if should I log out and log back into my Zoom? Because you'll still be,
I can go
it'll
ahead
still
and
have
stop
it
your
open.
sharing and have Grant do it for you.
Yeah, will you stop my
Yeah, I'll
screen?
stop here. There we
They won't allow me to share. It says that it's disabled.
go. Okay, hold on, Grant. I'll get you in there.
Kevin Bump's working on it.
Blessed are the flexible.
Okay, now you should have that option.
It's showing. Oh, yeah. Oh. Whoop.
Oops. Can you guys see this now?
You can, yes.
Is it full screen or is it
It's a
smaller?
presenter.
Presenter view.
It's okay.
Here's one.
Yeah, it's fine.
If you go up to display settings,
Yeah.
right there. Swap.
There we go.
Perfect.
Okay, let's talk some financial stuff. Thanks for the patience and yeah, so just as a refresher, the RMBD receives money through the Recycling Promotion and Assistance Fund that was created early in the 1990s. This is reported by the disposal facilities on the solid waste quarterly fees report. We do receive these fees quarterly, and those are checked by our Office of Land Quality Solid Waste team just to verify and double check what we're receiving and know what we're depositing. So the solid waste disposed is in state is charged 50 cents per ton. So when we get that 50 cents per ton, that is split evenly throughout the solid waste management fund as well as the recycling promotion and assistance fund. This is two different funds that we'll review later in the presentation. And Just as I'm sure many of you know, there's been about $30.5 million of grants and loans awarded by this board, the last 31 years, which has created 300 projects and more than 1,700 jobs in Indiana. So as I mentioned, this is kind of a flow chart of how the process works. These are receipts quarterly. So we get the collection of solid waste management fee, and when the revenue and collection distribution, which happens within the financial side of an individual on my team, in collaboration with OPS as well as the Office of Land Quality, and that fee per ton is distributed to the two different funds. As you can see, the solid waste management fund, what comes out of there expense wise is community recycling and operating expense. And on the other side, the recycling promotion assistance fund, that's where the recycling market development program allocates the $2 million towards the grants and projects, as well as there is some operating funds within that allows it to pay for the administration of those grants and projects. So going forward, as Commissioner Rockenshoes mentioned, as kind of an overview of some of the allocation of the projects and the amounts that we've done over the past few years. So the first column there is the actual fee and the revenue that is deposited in the Recycling Promotion and Assistance Fund. The legislative appropriations have been around $2 million the last 3 years. In the last column, you will see last year we allocated about $1 million out to grants and projects. That is mainly because of the pandemic. We were not sure what the financial outlook was going to be, so we were asked to reserve dollars from the state budget agency. So part of that reserve was $1 million worth of projects, just to make sure that we had that in our piggy bank if need be, and just to allocate back to the fund balance. I will say that any unspent dollars and any reserve within this fund goes directly back to the funds themselves. So they're not taken or swept and used in another fund. So they're just kind of held as a good financial practice to ensure that we have financial stability. So just because we did not spend the $2 million last year, it means that we lost those dollars. Those dollars were reallocated back to the fund to be used in future years. So for 2022 year to date, this is as of 12/31/2021. We received about $1.3 million. So I know Commissioner Rockenshoes mentioned, anywhere around 2 million. So we're just above kind of our average over the last few years. We did appropriate $2 million, and we're planning on using $2 million. We actually have an encumbrance within the system now to allocate those dollars out in the near future. To dive in a little bit more into the revenue, as I mentioned, the 50 cents per ton is split evenly between the State Solid Waste Management Fund as well as the Recycling Promotion and Assistance Fund. So as of fiscal year 2021, which is what ended June 30th of 2021, we received about $2.2 million. Fiscal year 22 year to date, we have about 1.3 million per fund, so about 2.6 halfway through the fiscal year. So anywhere around 4.8 to 5.2 million dollars is what we can expect for fiscal year 22. And we estimated around $4.8 million for fiscal year 23. So we're right on the estimates and kind of maintaining the revenue that we collect each year. So this revenue is what equals when we get, just from a budget perspective, when we get these revenues in, that does not mean we can automatically appropriate those dollars. So those dollars have to be appropriated through the budget cycle, which happens every 2 years. This summer will actually be in budget development, and then next General Assembly a year from now is when they'll actually be discussing and voting on the budget. So it's important that we estimate and kind of maintain the level of revenue, because that's what's going to dictate how much we're allowed to appropriate in future fiscal years. So just because we're getting a little bit more than we estimate does not mean that we can turn around and use those dollars. We'll have to go through the state budget agency and legislative process in order to appropriate those dollars. So to get a little bit more into the Recycling Promotion Assistance Fund, as I mentioned, that 50% of the solid waste management fee is collected each quarter throughout the fiscal year. Those dollars are used for the support the grant program, as well as $250,000 appropriated to support program and operational expense. So that's mainly personnel who administers these grants and reviews these grants, as well as some travel and supplies and necessary equipment to fulfill their operations. Finally is the cash balances at the end of fiscal year 21. So that's June 30th of 2021. So the State Solid Waste Management Fund has about $7.6 million in it. The Recycling Promotion Assistance Fund has about $15.2 million, so a little bit higher than Commissioner Rockins mentioned. This $15.2 million does not include the House Bill 1226, which, as you guys heard, passed through the House and is now with the Senate. And I think a hearing on that should be around 1214, 1215. So that $15 million does not include the $4 million that could be allocated for the pilot program. As of right now, we are estimating about $15.3 million being in that fund at the end of fiscal year 23, which is June 30th of 2023. So as Commissioner Rockins mentioned, we pretty much are using whatever we get in. Revenues have been a little bit higher over the last couple of years, but we're still allocating out the $2 million, as well as the operational fees associated, or costs associated with administering those grants. So we're estimating about $15.3 million at the end of next fiscal year. So staying right on target, and looking forward to seeing what happens with House Bill 1226 and being able to fund that from Recycling Promotion Assistance Fund if necessary. I believe that is the end of my presentation. I will open it up to any questions or comments that any of you have.
Any questions from board members? Hearing none. Mr. Geis, help me just to boil it down to the basics. If we award $2 million and we pull $4 million out, we will still have a cash balance of $9 million roughly in the fund, correct?
Well, that $15 million actually anticipates allocating the $2 million out. So it's estimating forward that, since we've done that over years, over the last few years, that we're already estimating that. So the $4 million would just kind of be the hard hit. So it'd be around the $10 to $11 million range.
Thank you. Any other questions from board members?
So this is Craig again with Republic. Thank you very much for the presentation. So just to clarify, the $4 million of the pilot program, that will not impact anybody else that would want to apply that has the initial $2 million in the bank, so to speak.
No, it will not. We verified that. We planned on and still continue to plan on having the $2 million for the purposes they've been used for over the last 31 years. And then this $4 million would be something different that would not disrupt kind of that process and that allocation.
Is that clear?
I believe so.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
$2 million doesn't go away.
Right.
2 million stays in addition to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
$2 million stays, and the $4 million would just be something different based on what the final bill looks like.
Any other questions?
It would still run through this board for approval.
For approval
Yes.
and
A presentation.
it still goes through the same process. So
Right.
it's not like somebody can put
That is my understanding right now.
put pen out and then it's like they automatically get it. It's got to go. There's got to be checks and balances, and it's got
Yeah,
to
it's
be.
my understanding it will come through this board.
That's my understanding as well.
Do we have any other questions for Mr. Geis? Hearing none, I thank you for a very thorough overview of the financial status we're in. And Appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you all very much.
Thanks, Grant.
Thank you.
I believe now it's probably the time for the status updates on existing grants, Deanna.
Yes. Sorry, I apologize. What's happening is that the projector is trying to act as a third monitor. And I had set it so that it was duplicating one of my other monitors, but when I started the PowerPoint, it reset itself. So my mouse keeps going in different directions. So I will do my best to keep us in the right view, so to speak, on the projector. But yes, status update of existing grants. I'm going to keep this really brief and short because we had an additional kind of add-on here. Grants are going very smoothly. There's no issues. I'm just working on closing out a bunch of fiscal year 21 grants and performing site visits. I've received a lot of final reports, great projects. Hope to, in the next couple of board meetings, have those grantees come and kind of present their projects to you guys and show an example of that. What I do have is a grantee I sent, hopefully the board members saw the email yesterday on Growing Green, their fiscal year 20 grant. So a lot of board members were not here when we awarded that grant funding. They are have a large project, and I can let Stephanie, the director, kind of talk on it, but it's a big eco park and there was going to be a MRF as part of that. Their time frame has kind of gotten greatly extended. And so if Stephanie would like to come up and talk to address the board, she is asking for an extension. They had a 1-year grant that we extended for 1 year that expires March 31st. And she's asking for an additional 2 years. So go ahead, Stephanie.
Hi, everybody. Yes, we are asking for a 2-year extension. I apologize that we need to do that. There was one main reason that this happened. And the biggest reason has a couple of offshoot reasons, but the biggest reason this happened is because of our naivety on how exactly long it would take to build a 114-acre energy independent eco park and locate a cutting edge recycling facility on there. We thought we could do it in a year. And this is our first big project. And we underestimated that, but by a long shot. And the other part of this, our rationale was when we started introducing this project to large companies in Indiana and across the United States, we got massive support and a whole bunch of people that wanted to partner with us. And we thought that that would convert into usable dollars for a budget that we could use to back this. And it didn't. It seems like there's a lot of really great companies out there who want to be partners, but weren't able to contribute. And that kind of held us up. We went down several funding paths. We started a qualified opportunity zone investment fund for investors. We have looked at other grant funding. There's federal award that would be about $3 million towards our total $22 million budget. So it turns out it's difficult to raise $22 million also in 1 year. But we've secured some other grant funding as well, potentials, but we need that first bit in order for them for us to be able to submit. So with the partnerships that we've gained from other companies as well, some of those partnerships include development organizations like APEC Engineering. They're a geotechnical engineering company, and they were able to educate us a little bit better on the timeline for development. And that is why we're here today asking for the 2-year extension. Because we have signed land contract agreements. This month, we will finalize annexation of the property into the Martinsville city limits. We have another 6 months that we'll be working on the zoning approval that we need through Martinsville. So it's commercial, light industrial, recreation, and conservation. With that, after that 6 months is up, we'll be able to break ground. And from there, once we break ground, it's 10 to 12 month lead time for Machine X to get us all of the equipment that we need to put into the recycling facility. That's why we're asking for 2 years. And we do apologize. We did underestimate our timeline. We are learning.
Ms. Nutter, ask a question.
You want to go ahead, Bruce, or you want me to?
Well, I have a question initially about the, I guess, the development of the park. You have not broken ground yet, is that correct?
No.
And will the material recovery facility be the first construction project, or will there be other buildings?
No, that will be the first.
I'm sorry,
That will be the first.
that will be the first.
Okay.
Yeah.
That will be the first building.
Craig or Andrew, do you have another question?
Yeah, just real quick, from a fund matching standpoint, I don't remember how much the state had helped, from a funding standpoint to help you guys. But with the funds that you guys are raising in behind the scenes through other sources, have you guys been able to match what we've been able to give you, double, triple?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. We are asking for a letter of support also from IDEM. We have been working with and are going to continue working with Denton's and Barnes and Thornburg on a tax exempt bond financing request. So we'd really like to ask for a letter of support that we can submit with that application, which will help us match that.
Deanna, if this was granted, how's that going to work with your job? Is that going to be difficult for you to, because I'm afraid that maybe this won't be the first extension request that was.
Right. Let me explain sort of the background of, yeah. So we gave them $249,175. That is already tied up in a purchase order, and that purchase order is open indefinitely. However, we do have a grant agreement in place, so I would need another 2-year amendment. We have one amendment for the first year extension. And that's the extent of how long we can make a grant agreement without getting special permission from the Department of Administration. So 4 years is how long we can keep the grant agreement. And that, so I had talked to Stephanie about that, and that's why we hope to get that done if she does get awarded the extension for that 2 years. Other than that, in the last grant extension that we put together for her, we also added an addendum to have reporting done every other month so that we can keep update on the progress of the facility. And she has been very good and timely on getting those reports to me every other month for the last year. So I would think that we would, again, decide on, the time frame for having that reporting in. So it adds a little bit extra to keep monitoring the progress of it, but not too much extra additional work. And it is feasible to do. If we decide not to extend the grant, that roughly 250,000 does go back into the fund, the Recycling Promotion and Assistance Fund. So it's not like lost to the general fund, but it also is not like, it's kind of tied up in this project now, whereas when it goes back into that fund, it kind of sits there until it's appropriated again, so to speak.
So from that standpoint, Deanna, and I'm trying to go back in my head when you guys have awarded us money when we requested through DRI.
Yeah.
It's part of it's paid out up front, or have we done anything on this 250 as far as rewarding them any money at all? So it's still sitting in our fund.
Mhm.
Okay.
So if we would say, no, we don't want to extend this, that $250,000 would go back into the market fund, right? into OPEB. And so that $250,000, if they wanted to reapply, they could, but there was $250,000 that somebody could have used. If we
Right.
don't.
Yeah, like sometimes if a grantee withdraws in the same year that we've awarded funding, we have that 250,000 that we then can possibly look at one of the applications that didn't get funded and apply that funding towards that applicant. But because this is several fiscal years back, we can't apply that 250 towards another grantee. It goes just back into the fund.
This
So in a way, it's not lost, but it's kind of.
does,
Yeah.
so let's say this year we have, like last year was 1 million, right? This year it's 2 million. If that, to the point of, does that 2 million go to 2.25 million? It still stays at 2 million.
It still stays at 2 million or whatever is
Yeah, so if
budgeted.
they would reapply for it, it'd be almost like they gave them.
Yeah, it'd be taking another 250 would be
Yeah,
taken out of the 2
somebody else.
million, yeah.
So we're coming up on the end of, excuse me, almost 2 years for them. And so they're looking to extend it to the max.
Yes.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yes.
I read through, this is Craig with Republic, just as I was reading through the briefing, you talked about, I just wanted to clarify, you talked about employees and the number of anticipated to having full staff and as well as currently on the team. And did I read it right that there's nobody yet hired, correct?
That's right.
The ground's not broke, there's no, but the okay.
That's right.
Can I ask, so when companies apply for the grant funding, there's the expectation of the match. When you applied, where was the match expected to come from at that point?
We didn't have it, and we had to have basically an asterisk next to our name that we didn't have that funding. It's not, I don't think it's required that you have to have it, but I think I think it's looked on highly if you do. And so when I stood up here the first time, there was big red letters behind my name that were flashing.
Stephanie, though, I know that, because of that reason, and we don't normally award funding to those who don't have proof of funding. And you're right, so that's where I made it very clear to the board at that time that you did not have proof of funding. This was an exception. You had been working several avenues at that time, and you presented to the board that you had thought that you would get funding in the next, week or two, I remember.
Yes.
So I think what Kelly is addressing is what was the expected funding at that time?
At that time, we were told by one of our partnering organizations to expect $6 million.
And remind me, when would this have been?
That was
Time-wise.
was it 2019? We applied for a 2020 period.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, that helps, I think, for context that, maybe 2020 was a little different than they had anticipated as well.
Yeah.
So from a business standpoint, are there other investors from the business world out there that are, we talk about, you talked about the one that said, hey, we'll give you 6 million. Are there other companies wanting to jump in and help you guys now?
We're hoping so. 3 o'clock today, I have a discussion with one that's got 150 million. We're really hoping for a small pot of that.
If they write the check, then we don't have to worry about the 250. But no, and those are the types of things where it's good to know because it would be nice if someone could jump on board and give you guys a little bit of a boost behind the scenes to where I know we've appropriated this, but if they can give you a boost also, it just makes it easier for the state to say, yeah, hey, let's run with this.
Yeah, I was hoping that gentleman didn't leave. Since he said there's an account with 11 million just sitting there unused, I thought, oh, I know a good project.
Well, that's ours.
That's ours.
You got 250 grand of that.
We got
right now,
250, okay.
$250,000 sounds better, right?
Thank you.
I have another question. So in looking at the eco park, I'm trying to remember the details of it. So the recycling portion that our grant funding is going towards is part of that. Remind me what else is part of this overall scheme?
The eco park.
Yeah.
So it's a 2-phase project. There's 38 acres that will be designated for business development. we are trying to make that a gridless system. Completely energy independent, so that people that locate there, businesses that locate there won't have utility expenses. That's a large task in and of itself. One lot will be designated and saved for the recycling facility. And this grant that we were awarded is for the purchase of a PET optical sorting piece of equipment to go in that recycling facility. Along with hiking paths, there's I don't have the numbers, but I believe 47 acres will be conserved hardwood forest. We will have 2 playground areas, dog park, and we'll have a memory lane that circles the entire park. And we're also hoping that with our recycling facility, that it can be a mixed use space. So either have an offset restaurant or something that draws the public there, not just a recycling facility.
They have, Stephanie, I pulled up your
Oh.
website.
So you said the recycling facility is expected to be the first
Yes,
to be developed.
yes. Yes,
And so will that, knowing that there's so much further development to come after that, is the plan that that will be operational as soon as it's built, so that even though there will be lots of other construction going on, this will be generating recyclables?
right, yes, absolutely, because from the recycling facility, we'll the profits or proceeds that we make will maintain the rest of the park, cleaning, all of that. So the recycling facility itself, we reached out to several companies that utilize new and emerging green energy technologies. One of the companies we reached out to was called Onyx Solar Glass. And we were told that if we can, make this greenhouse atrium entrance out of solar glass, that we can offset our operating costs by over 40%. That was exciting for us.
So who's the parent company of this?
Growing Green, we're a nonprofit.
And do you have other facilities in other locations?
This is our first. This is our very first, but we have been asked by other cities. So what we realized was that we created a blueprint for an eco park and a recycling facility that can be placed anywhere, really.
Yeah, I have another logistical question. So if we did extend this and they were, unfortunately not able to get the funding to actually move forward, then what would happen with the funds then at that point come back into our?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's one of those things where the money's already been appropriated, and it isn't gonna go back into that 2 million and make it 2 million, 2.5 or whatever, 0.225, whatever. It's out there and it's already been appropriated. To me, it's, do we put, like what you guys did before the end as far as, okay, hey, we need to have updates. And then maybe we revisit it every 6 months with an in-person board at the end of third quarter or something. Okay, hey, where we at? Are we making progress? So on and so forth. Those are types of things that we can do to move forward. But I mean, if it's already appropriated and we can't move it to another person right away, part of me saying, hey, let's go ahead and keep moving down the road because it has been appropriated, and just keep supporting you guys from that standpoint and from the connections with Republic, ERI, whomever, and other people with other connections. Maybe there's stuff that we can do in the background too to help you get it down the path. I don't know. I'm just throwing things out.
Is that a
there.
motion?
Sounds pretty good, didn't it?
Unfortunately,
We need a
we're so
motion.
far behind.
One way.
I mean, that's the way I feel. I mean, I'll make a motion that we can extend it. I mean, that's where my mind's at right now. I'll make that
For 2
motion.
years? Oh.
But it'd be for 2 years, correct, Deanna? And then that would be.
That's
at
what
the end
they're
of the fourth.
requesting, yeah.
So I'll make a motion for a 2-year extension with the limit with the reporting and stuff that we can develop to give to her and their team.
We have a motion by was it Mr. Lutz that made that motion?
No, it was Andrew.
Mr. Noonan, thank you. Do we have a second?
I will second. I will say I was hesitant. I will second.
Was that Kelly?
Yes.
Thank you, Kelly. Discussion.
I think now we have to put ramifications around reporting and structure to that piece of it. And then that way we've got some accountability to hold them to as they move forward, but they can also go back to their the other people are trying to go to and say, okay, we have an agreement with the state, and these are the types of things that we have in place that we have to meet with them to keep our funding from that standpoint. I'm just thinking broad knowledge here.
Yeah, and I just would add in the comments to the other board members, I was definitely undecided and unsure about how I would feel about this going into it, but knowing that the funding is basically, you know, that the state funds are protected, that whether they come back to the pool now or later, either way, we don't get to allocate to another project. I feel the same way, that it makes sense to move forward, because it is no risk to the state funding.
I think 2 years is too long for this project just to go on without us having any input. I think we'll give them a year and then come back and have them report to us. I know they're going to be reporting to Deanna, but to come back and show us what they've done and what kind of progress they've made. And then we could talk about the following year, the next time.
So it sounds like we can have her continue to do every other month reporting and then report to the boards, let's say every fall meeting or that would give her one this fall and then next.
Are you
fall.
saying you don't think a 2-year extension is appropriate? You think a 1 year?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So I hear what you're saying, and I also had that thought at some point. However, understanding what I know as an architect about construction and development and how far they have not made it so far, that they're basically starting from scratch at this point. I don't think there's any way that, as they've already learned, that they could get to where they need to get to in a year. So I do think that the 2 years is
I
appropriate.
don't think they'll have the money. I just would like to see the progress and have them come back. And
Oh,
show
absolutely.
us their progress in a year. So that's why I think the next year, if we want to give it every year, then we could do it at that time. That was one thing.
We could either have her come present to the board again on a progress this fall and then next fall, or we could do, if we want to do the full year, we could just have her present again at the next
If she comes-
first meeting of the year.
If she comes back next year and says, I'm the exact same spot as that last year, it might be time for us to perk our ears up and say,
But the point
the
is,
money's not going back.
it's locked up for 2 more years. And that's where Kelly's coming from.
Mhm.
So I struggle with this as well. I mean, I would feel a lot better if you had some funding,
So we're-
but
She's gonna send an email at 5 and say she got funded.
That's what
I mean,
waited to hear.
the $250,000 that we're talking about is a drop in the bucket for what you really need. So, but I see the points of the other board members. If it's locked up for 2 more years, I struggle with it, but I say we continue with the updates and hope that you get your funding.
I won't let you guys down. This is a nice and good project. And we won't let you down. And IDEM especially, you guys were the first ones to take a chance on us. And we will not fail. We won't let you down. It might take us 2, but we're gonna do this. And we're gonna show everybody that it can be done.
Deanna, are we setting a precedent here that we have risk associated with? Because normally we require matching funds in hand when we award a grant.
Correct. As far as I know, and Tom can speak of the history of the program more than me. He's been there longer, but I don't know that we've ever awarded a grant without having the proof of funds. Tom, do you know?
Well, no, that generally is the case. There's always exceptions and the board can do what they want to do at that moment. And we do look at, how secure is that funding up front? And it's not required, but for progress to be done in a year's time, it needs to be committed. And so we do check that, and we do want that as we approve projects.
So could we table this vote to see if the fundings come in?
So no.
Okay.
The grant
Oh, because
agreement
it expires.
expires.
I got it. There's a time issue. I got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think our 2 options are either vote yes to extend, no to ask them to come back when they're at a point where they have matching funds in hand. Those would be our two options.
And that would start brand new, fresh again. And start
Correct.
the $2 million of others that come in. Correct.
And the only hesitation I have about that option is that means in the next grant cycle,
Mhm.
basically, if they were to come back and were to receive funding again, then that's $250,000 that some other companies do not
Yeah.
get.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the whole issue.
And that's why I'm trying to lean towards, let's just hang with it, and it's already out there, let's not try and take away from others, that's the reason why I made the motion.
And that's the motion that's on the floor.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Any other
We're
Yeah,
in
in a
discussion
second.
right now.
In a second, that's when we've moved to discussion, so. We're ready for the vote, I think.
Okay, roll call vote. Mr. Gratz,
Yes.
is Mr. Guerin on the call? Ms. Hickman,
No, it must not be. I knew he reported he was sick yesterday. So.
all right. How about Ms. Hackman? How do you vote?
No.
Is that a no?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Lutz, Mr. Lutz, how do you
Oh,
vote?
yes, yes, I did vote. Yay,
Yeah.
thumb up.
Hands down, thumb up.
Mr. Noonan,
Yes.
Ms. Uyghur,
Yes.
Ms. Wessler Henry,
Yep.
Ms. Whitehead,
Yes.
and I vote yes. With that, the yeses or ayes have it, and the motion carries. And we intend for a maximum of 2 years with annual reporting to the board every fall. Does that cover it?
That covers it. Yep, thank you, Bruce,
Thank you very much.
for coming and talking to us today, Stephanie.
Thank
Yes,
you
thank
guys.
you.
And yes, as soon as we have the funding, you guys will be the first ones in the email. You might be the very first. Thank you.
All right, we can move on to our next agenda item. We are drastically behind schedule, unfortunately.
Next agenda item is strategic planning. Is that correct, Deanna?
Yes, strategic planning. So I will go ahead and introduce Geneva here, Geneva Tyler. She is with the Indiana State Department of Agriculture's Division of Soil Conservation. She is a district support specialist. If some of you that are, we have so many new board members here today, but she actually has had the pleasure of doing some strategic planning with the board in the past and in 2019. So we'll go over a little bit, but that's when we established our mission and vision that is up here on the wall. And we did actually set, I think, 11 priorities at that time, which we will kind of just briefly mention in a little bit. So she has her own agenda. She's going to go over. Is there anything else you need to?
I think we're ready. I did want to, you've been going for an hour and a half. Do you want to take like a 5-minute break?
That's
Anybody need a 5 minute?
yes. Okay, 5-minute break.
Julia, if I may, prior to Geneva starting, I have just one item I want to discuss with the board. We've made one exception, and basically we've set a precedence now to where we're funding on speculation. We want to reaffirm our commitment that the applicants have funds in hand when we award on a move forward. Or is that just an understood situation? How does the board members feel about that?
This is Craig, I would agree.
I agree also.
I'd make a motion that we vote that funding must be secured for a grant. Is that, would that be accurate?
Matching funds.
Matching fund.
So we have by Mr. Lutz that matching funds be available at the time of award on future grant applications. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Hackman. Any discussion?
Yeah, so just, this is Kelly. So the discussion I would like to have is, although I completely agree with the sentiment, and after having gone through that review and the update, I would be extremely cautious and hesitant to approve another applicant who does not have proof of funds. The only question I have about having a motion is, what if somebody has 95% of matching funds or 80% of matching funds? It doesn't, I mean, are we strictly saying don't apply unless you have 100%?
They can apply, I think they can apply.
Good point.
I don't think, but it would be just, they would, could that be disqualified?
Well, it also comes back to I mean, I know last year was the first year I sat through the process, but let's say they've got matching funds for $250,000, but they're asking for $300,000. If they can match the 250, we can approve them for the 250. You see what I'm saying, Kelly, from that standpoint?
Sure.
And that's where Bruce, am I off kilter here as far as trying to, from the discussion standpoint? I mean, I think we need to, I'm in support of Craig as far as the motion he's making, and everyone's just, okay, where do we set that? Where do we draw that line at? 'Cause
Well,
I know
that's
we
the
can-
clarification is, are we saying at the time that they apply, or are we saying the matching funds, are we saying in order to get approved, they have to have matching funds for whatever amount we are willing to award versus what they're asking for? That's a distinction I think is important to clarify.
I would say that they need to have matching funds for what we are going to approve.
That I would get behind.
That makes sense from that standpoint, Sandy, because then if they only have the 250, we only award the 250. That way, let's get them the game with the 250 and we know they can match it.
Yeah.
May I say something real quick? I think you need to be careful with the language. If the motion was that they have the matching funds. A lot of times we get applications, they may not have the matching funds, but they have proof of the funds. For instance, they might have a letter from the bank saying, if you get the grant, then you'll get a loan for this amount of money. So I think the language, we need to be very specific on the language, that they have to have proof of funds as opposed to they have to have the matching funds.
That's good.
That's a good point.
So proof
Great
of
point.
matching funds.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Pat, for that clarification. And with that said, Mr. Lutz, would you like to amend your motion?
I would like to amend my motion to whatever Pat said. That amend the motion to allow for proof of matching funds in the application that they submitted.
Well, I believe it would be that the board would require proof of matching funds for the amount to be awarded. Not necessarily the application request, right?
An applicant is required to have proof of matching funds for the amount to be awarded.
Which maybe end up being less than the amount they're applying for.
Yes.
That makes
So
sense.
you're saying if they have proof of matching funds for $200,000, they can apply for $500,000.
But we wouldn't know.
But we wouldn't only,
Two.
couldn't we just say is you can only apply for what you've got proof of, so it's clear to them?
I mean, that makes sense.
That's why I would say is then, you
And
know,
we say, let me just provide some clarification too. We already in the RFP, and of course we're meeting today, and I really want to get to this part of what the next grant and RFPs are gonna look like. So I think this is a conversation we can kind of discuss at the next meeting when we're finalizing the RFPs. However, we do ask for proof of matching funds already in the RFP, and it is part of the proposal process. There's always exceptions to the rule. There's always. Stephanie in this situation had called me when she applied and said, it'll be a week. And then, things happened, the bank postponed it, the meeting, because there was also, I think, bank funding that she was meeting with. And it came right up to the deadline of the board meeting. I was, waiting for that proof of matching funds. I kept her in there because she said she was going to have it by the board meeting. And that board meeting came and she said, oh, it's so close. And so I let her present to the board. And it was just one of the exceptions. It's not the norm. So I think the board is maybe overly concerned with making sure that this is.
But I don't,
it doesn't hurt to have it in there.
I hear what you're saying. The thing about it is at the end of the day, 2 years ago, that $250,000, this is where the whole play is, somebody else did not get that. And they could have used that to have more recycling today and do more recycling and do waste diversion with I look at the priority goals and things like that, but it went to this, that it's in this rain, it's in this cloud where that money could have actually been applied 2 years ago and being and significant impact to diversion.
So should we table this
Can I say
conversation to next
something
meeting?
real quick? I think there were 14 projects that applied for the funding and all 14 received their total.
Yeah, I
That
think this
then,
was the
but not
year
last
that,
year. Last year we had
Right.
groups that. did
and
not
this
get
I think
funded.
was the year that we didn't even have the full, we had 2 million to award and we didn't award the full 2 million.
I don't think it gives any of us a warm fuzzy feeling that this happened. And that's
Sure.
what we're trying to.
I think this would be a good discussion to think about and have at our next meeting.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we should talk about this at the next meeting.
Someone did, I will just, so that we're including our members online, because I don't have, someone did not identify themselves, but it asks for consideration, what if someone asks for cart money but doesn't have matching funds for that, but does have funds for the service, city or town switching over from bins to carts? And the board has not used services in place of cash match in the past, but just wanted to put that one out there too. But yes, I think that if the board is okay, I'd really like to get to the strategic planning portion of this. And the next meeting, we are going to approve RFPs and grant procedures. So it's right in line for that discussion.
With that said, Mr. Lutz, would you be willing to table your motion?
Do I table my motion or does it die because nobody gets a second?
It had a second.
Well, it's already been seconded by Ms. Hack.
So I can recant my motion after it was seconded? Or does it have to go to
You
vote?
can't recant it after people have discussed on it.
Yeah, you gotta vote on it.
That's what I thought.
We can lay a motion on the table until the next meeting. We can do that.
I move that we table this discussion to the next meeting.
Second.
Okay.
Motion by Ms. Uyghur,
You have to vote on the motion on the floor, though.
Yeah, it's on the floor, you have to vote on, it, so it can die, it can die, but then someone else can make a motion to table the discussion. Until next week. Or on the agenda.
No, she just waited, votes to lay it on the table.
But we already have a motion and a second on the table and a discussion, so it has to go through a vote.
Okay.
we have a motion by Mr. Lutz, we have a second by Ms. Hackman. We will vote on that motion. And I would expect then a motion to table following that vote. Mr. Gratz,
No,
Ms. Hackman,
Yes,
Mr. Lutz,
Yes.
Mr. Noonan.
I'm not sure how to vote. I want to table the darn thing. Okay, no. Okay, no then.
No to table.
Oh, yes, the table.
No, I mean,
no,
no,
no on the motion.
No, sorry, Bruce.
Ms. Uyghur,
No.
Nobody's reading you, are they?
That was a no, Ms. Uyghur.
Yeah, I mean, no.
Correct.
Ms. Wessler Henry,
No.
Ms. Whitehead,
No.
I'm sorry,
No.
and I vote no. So Mr. Lutz's motion does not carry. Do I have another motion then to table?
I would move the table of discussion to the next meeting.
We don't.
Do we need to do
No,
that?
just have
We don't
to
have
on
to.
the
Oh,
agenda.
we don't have to. Okay, great.
We'll just
We
put
don't
it on
have-
the agenda
Ask
for the
for
next
the
meeting.
Just make it again extra.
Be on the agenda for the next meeting.
Yeah, out of there.
Very good.
Our FFA.
So I'll go back on Parley days.
That's right, that's where I went.
Yeah. All right.
Deanna, can
Thank
we
you
have
very much.
hard copies of what we've had for RFPs in the past for the next meeting to have in front of us? If we forget to do that, like what we send out to people
Yeah,
visually. Thank you.
I'm sure I have some with me.
All right. If no other motions necessary, then we can move on to strategic planning.
Well, like Deanna said, I am Geneva Tyler. I'm with the Indiana State Department of Agriculture. My counterpart Nathan was supposed to be here today, but he was unable to, unfortunately, so you just get me. So we're gonna spend some time talking about just doing a brief review of some of your priorities from a couple of years ago. I was here in 2019, I believe. And thank you for inviting me back. So I think it's great that since I was here last time, your budget has pretty much doubled, which is pretty exciting. And it sounds like there's a lot of exciting projects going around. So we have a little bit of time to go over some things. So just kind of what we put on the agenda for this part of the agenda was to review your mission and Indiana code. And I put them both up here just for you guys to have in front of you through the remainder of this discussion. It sounds like you all have a pretty good focus on what your goals and mission is, but I just put them up here anyway. And we wanted to discuss the results of the Indiana Recycling Infrastructure and Economic Study recommendations. And so that's what you see up here on the walls. And for those of you online, I think Deanna was going to.
I'm working on
She's
it.
attempting to put them in the online for you guys to see. And I'm gonna verbally go through them. I summarized just the recommendations, not the whole study, because that's out of my, you don't need a summary of a study. And then after that, we'll see how much time we have. After that, I wanted to go back and review and identify any, out of that discussion, the first discussion, review any potential funding priorities or project priorities for the next few grant rounds, depending on what comes out of the first part of the discussion. And then the fourth part of the discussion today is to identify any specific components you as a board would like to see in your grant proposals, such as data reporting, partnerships, things of that nature. So we'll see how far we get today. And if we don't get very far, I'm happy to come back. So just to start out, I just wanted to review that the mission that we came up with last time I was here in 2019 was to promote innovative projects to make Indiana a leader in recycling and waste reduction. And I realized when I wrote this, I think I write huge, and then in the back of the room is probably a little bit difficult to see. And the vision that you landed on was that Indiana will be a leader in innovative recycling technologies, which is awesome. And it all kind of stems from Indiana code over here, is that you as a board shall consider projects involving the creation of the following. So the first one is the markets for products made from recycled materials, and 2, new products made from recycled materials. And so the board may promote, fund, encourage programs facilitating the development and implementation of waste reduction, reuse, and recycling in Indiana. So before we move on, is there any discussion about your mission, vision? All right. Well, I'm going to keep these up here just again to have them kind of at your forefront. So moving on to the study. For those of you online, I am gonna, I don't know if you can, if you have that study in front of you or if it gets online, but I'm gonna read through them. And then we're gonna hone in on a few of them before we really jump into the conversation. So at the end of the study, if you had a chance to read it, or at the end of the study, there were 24 recommendations. And so there were, the first two were end user and processor data collection outreach, and I apologize, they're kind of behind, unless they're scattered around. Develop survey process for end users. The third one was enhance current item solid waste and recycling data reporting program requirements for solid waste districts. The fourth one was to enhance item solid waste and recycling data reporting program requirements for solid waste districts. And the fifth one recommendation was enhancements to item solid waste and recycling data reporting for communities. And then the second group that focused on, I think,
Materials management planning.
Materials management planning was to create solid waste and format template for solid waste districts. And then update statewide materials management plan every 5 years. The third one in that category was to update solid waste district materials management plans every 5 years. And then the fourth one in that category was to provide funding for zero waste, circular economy and sustainability plans for communities. And then I'm getting
with Indianapolis and Marion.
So C, I'm gonna go over here. Was to create a solid waste district and plan for Marion County. And the second one in that category was non-subscription curbside recycling program. The third one was regional collaboration. And that was it for the C categories. And then
D, focus on state and local funding.
Was increase state disposal fees to provide funding for materials management enhancements. And local, the second one in that category was local funding for solid waste districts.
And E, focus on recycling collection programs.
And the recommendation for that one was materials management plans and recycling best practices. And then the second one was require or recommend minimum access.
F, focus on recycling and processing.
So for F, we had two recommendations: regional MRF shed development and support. The second one was MRF education and outreach.
G was organics and food waste.
And the recommendation was organics, recycling, including food waste.
H, focus on grant programs.
So that recommendation was grant funding. And then,
I, economic development.
which the recommendation was integrated materials management and economic development.
J, end user recycling markets.
And there were two recommendations in that category. So the first one was end user reporting and EPR legislation.
And K is public-private partnerships.
And the recommendation for that category was to utilize and promote public-private partnerships. So, there's a lot of categories there, but in some preliminary discussions, item recommended and pulled out 6 of those for you to focus on. 6 that the items that sees as areas that you as a board can tackle and have influence on. And that would be the, for you in the room, it's those that are boxed in orange. So for those of you online, the 6 recommendations that were kind of pulled out as recommendations that you as a board could tackle were A2, to develop survey process for end users. B4, to provide funding for zero waste, circular economy and sustainability plans for communities. F1, regional MRF shed development and support. F2, MRF education and outreach. G1, organics recycling, including food waste. And K1, to utilize and promote public-private partnerships. So I want you to take a few minutes and think about those. And here in a minute, we're going to start the discussion. If there's anything up here that you don't see highlighted that you want to discuss, we can discuss those. Also, if there's anything else that you'd like to address as far as if you have any additional ideas to expand your recycling markets, go ahead and write those down. I have Post-it notes in front of you. So if you want to write those down, or if you have paper, you don't have to use the Post-it notes. But there's paper if you want to write those down, and then we'll open it up for discussion. And then the goal is to identify what you want to prioritize.
Sure. We can take yeah, Allison, if you want.
Thank you. My name is Allison Mitchell. I'm with the Circular Indiana, formerly Indiana Recycling Coalition. And I have a question about B2 and B3. It's my understanding that the state has not updated its statewide materials management plan since the age of the typewriter. Because the current one is done on a typewriter. And I also understand that for the solid waste management district materials management plan has to flow from that. Those district plans have to be responsive to the statewide plan. So I'm just curious as to why that one was not prioritized. Because it seems as though that might be helpful in the process.
That is state statute. The state plans are written in state statute, and the solid waste management districts, requirements are written in state statute, and that's not the purview of the board. So when IDEM was looking at these priorities, and the ones that we picked out were ones that the board could make some changes.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
Are there any other discussions or questions?
Bruce, do you see anything that's not highlighted that you or anybody online just want to make sure?
Yeah, we're just the jumping board. We just picked out some just based on our knowledge, but the board definitely might. And we want this to be a board-led decisions, so.
I see nothing that was not covered that I'm concerned about at this time.
How do we have control over this one?
Yeah, we had some confirmation or conversation. That one's a little bit.
Debbie has a question about A2.
Thank you. A2, develop survey process for end users. That's something that the board could think about and recommend for IDEM to include.
It's a good thing.
Yeah. It's definitely not, directly grant related, but it's something that the board could meet their code and their mission, to get that information.
Yeah, it's a little challenging to think about just what aligns with the board's.
It is.
I want to say something about all of them.
And a lot of the other ones, are legislative decisions, unfortunately. So that makes it even more challenging for us, because we do want to go there. I know all of us do. Allison Mitchell has another comment.
Yeah, I just want to encourage you to, when you see those items on there, think about ways your partners could be helpful in doing, is that one of those ones where maybe Circular Indiana could facilitate that information and share it with you?
Good one.
Isn't it required if they get a grant from us already that they have to do this reporting? Is that required?
It is not.
So that's something we can do. If they do get a grant from us, we can require them to do reporting during that
Now,
time.
recyclers are required. I guess I should, it just depends on the grantee. Recyclers are required.
Yeah.
And Tom can talk about requirements of those who are, but, so a lot of grantees are required. And of course, we encourage them to, but that is something that as we move in, like, we can prioritize that now, and as we move into what we want to see the next grant round look like, if we want to see that on the RFPs, let me know, and we'll put it, take your, suggestion.
Are there any other questions regarding or clarification questions for any of these?
I would just say B4 is very broad. And I would say, yeah, we're contributing towards that.
Mhm.
I think right now we don't fund management plans. I would, so if we do, yeah, we don't fund updates to management plans, so I mean, that can be part of the discussion.
They can be done, they can be done. Solid waste districts teach them how to do them, so at no cost, so you can pay some engineering company $30,000 like planning to do. No, I got to this issue.
So on A2, when you say develop survey process for end users being
End users are the
the
ones.
public, the end users being the
The
mills
manufacturers.
or the manufacturers that accept the recycling or the commodities.
Right,
Okay.
they would be, end users. It could be in tiers, as the flow of recyclables go to an end user. And like the Pratt paper mill, they're
Right.
considered an end user. They're taking recyclables that's been collected and processed, sent to them, and they're making cardboard.
Right.
Paper. So they'd be a first tier end user, but it goes downstream, and there's plenty of other jobs that go with that material downstream, which we don't want to track. We want to track the first tier of vendors, who they may be. Where do you draw that line? It's a gray area.
Right.
We address that in our reporting. Where do you draw that line? And material recovery facility is considered a recycling facility. A compost operation, they take materials in, but yet they produce a basic product, and they're a gray area. We consider them a recycler. They do both, materials go direct to that facility, and they're making a basic product as compost.
Construction sites, concrete.
Yeah.
You can make gravel, you can make quarry, and then you got scrap yards, right?
Well, the metals, most metals fall outside of the material or municipal solid waste stream. There's a lot of C and D type metals that get collected and sent to downstream markets. So yeah, our recycler list mainly is within the material recovery facility shed.
Yeah.
What goes into that is part of that recycling stream. So once it leaves that material recovery facility, it's its first tier manufactured products. Usually.
So I'm looking just quickly at the actual study to see that recommendation and what they may have defined it as, but they do not.
And collect data from in-state and out-of-state sources by type of material.
We're looking for that from the first tier end user. period. We just need to start somewhere, right? Because we don't have that information right now.
Well, on the infrastructure side, we do have it from a material recovery facility shed. But on the market side, we like to say, we have a market for all materials that are generated in the state from these locations. From an infrastructure side, we want to build the collection to the material recovery facility to get it to the next step. So I think we're good on that part, but the survey for end users is different than what a material recovery facility would do. And an end user may get materials from Indiana as well as from out of state for what their needs. And at Knopf, insulation, they're going to take 100, 200,000 tons of glass a year going into fiberglass. And most of that glass comes from out of state. And so how do they report what they use? They report how many tons come from Indiana and how many tons come from out of state. That's the kind of reporting that we would need of first tier manufacturers. Yeah, that becomes pretty sensitive to those companies, how willing they want to share that information. So yeah, it's going to be defined. And there could be a top 100 companies of users in the state that use recyclables. But we know from our study, it's much greater than that. The economic impact is much greater than 100 companies. And we cannot require reporting from all the downstream users of recyclables. It would be overwhelming. But if we do look at the first tier of users, that might be something that could be collected in a separate survey than what we're doing now. What is the material recovery facility shed, infrastructure-wise, the collection? We're good in that reporting, but sometimes we're missing recyclables that get shipped outside of that shed. And that reporting is not collected. It could be direct.
Like direct mill type or direct.
Yeah, a generator has recyclables and they send that directly to a mill. Doesn't go through a merge shed.
Right, yeah.
And so we get some of that reporting. It's voluntary, but it's not mandatory like what a work would do.
I was just gonna say, and like what Tom just mentioned, that reporting. What the board needs to consider is, these are recommendations that are meant for all stakeholders basically involved in recycling. Would that type of A2 be something that legislators should have, or something more directed to them? I think the goal is for the board to decide, you mentioned the study, these are the recommendations out of that study. Are there any of these recommendations something that the board within their authority can and would like to pursue?
Tom, what you talked about, the end users, so is it the state legislature that mandates that all landfills report their tonnage? Who mandates that?
Landfills is solid waste side, and they're required to report.
Who enforces that? Who made that
That's the
rule?
Office of Land Quality, and that came through legislation back in the 90s.
So whoever that group is should make the same type of legislation for recycling,
Well,
or would be appropriate for that group.
the recycling requirements came in 2014, a different bill, different.
Right, so who,
It's recycler facilities, mandatory reporting of recycler facilities. End users, I still don't think it was totally understood what a recycler facility was. It had to be defined as we move forward. And we defined it to be the infrastructure, mainly within the material recovery facility shed. And not so much on the primary end users making basic products and recyclables. Because that's another whole scope of companies.
right, but to get that information, and making sure it's accurate, we would need that.
On
For
use,
those
on the use side,
Yeah,
it says, we got an industry within the state that uses this many tons of recyclables. That's what it would tell us.
yeah, so to get the diversion rate, the actual, or recycling rate, we would need that information then.
It goes to markets, and once it's collected and generated, available for markets, we don't, we prefer that it goes to in-state facilities, but you know, it could go out of state too. And it's a market and so we don't care from calculation wise, recycling rate. We just know that it was collected and sent to a market. That's all we need to know for recycling rate measurement. That's as far as we go.
Yeah.
It gets complicated once you go downstream very far. And you're trying to get reporting to represent that data on a consistent basis. And the reporting has to be consistent, you know, year to year. And the same facilities need to submit that data to draw meaningful conclusions and trends.
So question, so specifically A2 is about finding a way to collect data on what recycled materials are used by end users. So if we were to try and start with the top 100 users, you know, I feel like the conversations are already happening with, there are people who know how much glass Knopf uses and others. And I know Circular Economy, certainly, you know, they held a session last fall with a bunch of users from industry that were sharing the volumes that they use and how much they would love to get from recycling in Indiana. I think that's the point of the ultimate goal of this, is that we can understand how much local industry uses and would like to be able to use, then we can justify other things to boost the infrastructure to get more of those goods directly to them. So I don't know that this necessarily would have to be an annual onerous thing or something that is mandated per se, but we already have conversations and established relationships with a lot of these companies. I think it's not that difficult. And maybe it's, if we end up with a updated statewide material management plan every 5 years, and every 5 years we go back to those companies and see what's changed. But you know, Knopf, as an example, year to year, it's not going to change that much unless they're growing dramatically. So that's kind of my, how I interpret this particular specific recommendation.
Good discussion. Over on this wall, does everyone understand what the regional MRF seal development and support? Does everyone understand what the MRF stands for? Yeah. Okay. Just clarifying.
Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, we call it a MRF for materials recovery.
Okay.
Love those acronyms.
Love those acronyms.
Yes.
Gotta love the acronyms, yes. Right, does anyone have anything, if any, that they would like to add, or if something is not written down, that you would, or that you would like to see the board prioritize, I can certainly highlight it as well.
I'm curious to hear what the other board members think about B4, specifically that it's for planning, you know, which we don't, I mean, other than commissioning this particular plan, we haven't really done much of that. I don't know.
And can I add real quick? The recommendation, I did get an email from Dan Grader, who conducted the study. And he said his recommendation for the board, if the board was to move forward on any of the recommendations, his number one was funding updates and new materials management plans. That's what when he talks to the industry and when he talks to solid waste management districts, that's where he's heard there's a need. So this is a good discussion because I know Debbie has an opinion too.
I've got a lot of opinions around it. There was a district that told me when they wrote their initial plan, well, how many years ago, it's been now, I've lost track, 50 years ago. In 1991, they paid $30,000 for that typewritten plan, which is this thick, and mine is too. And mine is just about like my neighbors because it was the same company that went around. And so we have created a solid waste districts for their members. They have created a template. So they just have to follow the template and put it in numbers and help them create their own plans. So they don't have to be 300 pages. They could be 10 pages if they answer all the questions. So, and then as they make changes in the programs, they add to it. They can be added every year, every 5 months, whatever, whenever a change comes back. I don't think that we need to use state funding for it. Sandy, what do you, some of these districts are so small that I'm afraid they'll be taken advantage of by some of the big companies are out there that are trying to write plans for a lot of money. That's,
Well-
and we don't need to spend that kind of money on them.
I mean, not to discount what you're saying about the plug and chug plan, but the point of those plans should be to make sure that districts are developing themselves and changing themselves and updating themselves. So are we in fact reaching that?
I don't think that doing this would make them do it any different, you know? I mean,
Here's another thing that is happening is there are multi-county districts out there who are splitting. And new districts are being formed that don't have a plan from 20 years ago. And they're trying to use the current state solid waste plan to develop it. And it's not clearly plug and chug for
but
them.
the state plan isn't, the state plan is. well, as we
Unfortunately, I
said,
mean,
is
like,
very, very outdated.
Under OLQ has to approve their plan still. And all they have to go on is that 30-year-old plan as guidance. That's just the way it is right now, so.
So do they, I don't know these plans, so do they
Yeah.
have to do reporting on where they're at on these plans, or they just stay on the shelf and get dust?
Right. According to statute, oh my gosh, I'd have to look it up. They're supposed to be updated every 20
The
years,
state,
right?
yeah, the state statutes, yeah, it doesn't have, yeah.
Yeah.
What do they do with the
It's-
plans afterwards?
They,
So they
well,
do-
some of them use them, some of them, it depends on how active the board is in
But
pursuing that.
But when a new district comes on board, they have to follow statute and report to OLQ that they're a new district. There's certain guidelines for them and they do have to create a plan.
But
So,
most districts, if they even know where their original plans are,
Right.
most
Yeah.
don't,
Yeah.
because they're 50 years old. Those plans were so generic, mine was, it was just that, because nobody knew what we were doing. It was the very, very initial.
Well, each district is different, so they have a certain amount of staff, some have no staff, some have staff. So we run the same thing with soil and water districts, and so I'm looking at this here, I like the idea of zero waste, circular economy, sustainability. But can we just take the plans for communities off and just make that even for businesses that are interested in doing zero waste? And getting the communities to bring those kind of businesses there or encourage the current ones there to go towards that goal. So there's a grant dollars that we can provide for these communities or for these businesses to go that route. That's where I think the board could fit into. We saw a grant coming through. Get away from those plans. Let's see the plans that they have for that individual entity
So like a
to go
business-
zero
business
waste.
plan.
Mhm,
Yeah,
yes,
like going to
Yes.
tree would have been great to see
Yeah.
their business plan.
the action to get there, not these plans sitting there gathering dust.
keep in mind, that plans maybe for circular economy sustainability plans, zero waste may not fall under our code as to the projects that we are wanting to fund or can fund.
That's why
As much as zero waste is a great concept, that's not what the board was created for.
It's still waste reduction, correct?
So,
So I still
yeah,
follow
so
the
you
law.
follow that.
So I like waste reduction a lot better than zero waste. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but zero
Yeah.
waste makes me cringe.
it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Please,
It doesn't exist. Go to bed,
Right.
go to the Southside landfill and see where they put the
right.
things that come from Covanta.
I like waste reduction
Yeah,
better.
yeah.
Here in a minute, I'm gonna have you guys stand up and I gave everyone should have some of these docs. If you all feel like if there's more discussion, we can have more discussions. I don't want to rush this discussion. If we want to have a good discussion to be able to prioritize these, if you want to prioritize these. So I'll leave it up to the board, but I would like, and here in a second, I'm gonna have you stand up and have 3 votes. And to be able to vote on what you think the priority should be for your board of these recommendations. And so you can use all 3 dots on the same item if you would like, or you can spread them out among those that are highlighted, or if you choose one that is not highlighted, then we can discuss that as well. But maybe let's go ahead and, unless there's more discussion, let's go ahead and do the voting, and then we can come back and see where we're laying from there.
I have on
Yeah, go ahead.
F1, just rereading this, so basically it's saying additional investments in MRF processing will be necessary. Evaluate MRF sheds and identify opportunities for recycling processing. I don't know specifically what that means. In relation to the board.
I understood that to mean to try to get communities to work together. If there's a MRF here, to try to get the product from the other communities to that, working with one MRF in a region. As opposed to.
Or is it? I mean, does that align, is that kind of what the hope was with Go Green? Is trying to, that's how I read that, Kelly, is if a Go Green has the funding and, or, you know, as we tabled that, so I won't go there, but that isn't that the intent of the $2 million annually to go and promote and give grants funds for infrastructure builds for recycling efforts. And the regional MRF shed development, the grants support those developments, builds, technology, infrastructure, new sorting lines, optical sort lines, maybe in current place to be able to sort more and get more quality product through an optical sort system, through a new eddy current sort, to a new, you know, whatever that infrastructure is in the current things, to be able to get more and more high quality for goods to be sold, as well as development of, you know, a program or a thing like the play in Morgan County.
So in the context of our role, would you say, again, I'm just going by the language that's specifically in here, that it would be, you know, if this was a priority, that it would mean that us as a board would prioritize if we were getting requests for funding for improvements to recycling processing that would affect MRF sheds specifically? And then the second one, F2, just really goes right along with it. It's just the education outreach
Yeah.
in relation to that.
We have G1 over here as a board priority, support organics recycling. And then organics recycling.
So right after we identify these priorities, we will look at our old priorities and mesh them together and go from there.
So
Where we want to see the grants look like.
So we have 3 votes right now.
You have 3 votes right now, so if you're ready, go ahead and vote. Again, you can use all 3 votes for one recommendation, or spread them out one, you know, wherever you want to put them. And then we'll tally those up and have a discussion if you're happy with those results. And then we'll go from there.
So it's basically just say, these are the ones that I think of all of them, and of the 6 highlighted, these are the ones that I think are most important and valuable for our board to be discussing.
Yes.
Okay.
And potentially what you want to prioritize for the board.
Okay.
To address. And for those of you online, if you want to text me, I think Deanna put my phone number in the text or in the chat, or you can put them in the chat if you're comfortable with that, and we can put your votes up on the board as well, or on the papers.
you on the Zoom? It's the same. Okay. That's weird. You just, that's why, you don't see the historical. You only see what, since you've been logged in. Yeah, I just stay logged in.
Yeah, is there anything in the chat?
No.
You guys are fast. So,
Did Bruce vote?
That's what I was thinking.
Did our other board members vote?
Yeah.
Bruce.
I did not get any response from Bruce. Do you have?
Matt, is Matt still?
Matt had to leave.
Maybe he's a slow typer.
I have not received anything.
And Representative Arrington, if you have anything you want to add to the conversation or prioritize, we are happy to have your input as well.
Thank you. I just found a list.
Okay. Yes, I did put it in the chat.
That helps a lot.
Yeah, a lot of these things on the board, Representative Arrington, you can help with.
Yeah, you can do all that other stuff.
Yeah, I was just thinking when Allison brought up the antiquated state solid waste management plan, I thought, oh, maybe that's something we legislators on this board could help with.
It looks like we have three that really stand out above the others. So K1, for those of you online, K1 got 6 votes that utilize and promote public and private partnerships. F1 and F2 both got 4 votes. And then G1 and B4 both got 2 votes, and A2 got 0 votes. So is there any discussion, any additional discussion regarding those?
Yeah, just one clarification on the end user surveys. That information would complement our existing data collection. And so we would compare that data. We would compare with what was generated in-state and shipped to what in-state users of the first tier users, how many tons they use. And so, you know, ideally those numbers should converge. It lets us know, here's what the users are indicating, and we have data on what is being generated and shipped. So they would complement each other of information. So I'm not saying that end user surveys is not needed in our second rate measurements. It provides credibility if we have it.
But that's not really something that we as a board can help with, right? I think that's what we.
Right.
kind of
Yeah, it would,
decided during the
it would be a unique survey for that sector.
You could fund a partner who would then carry out the survey for you, for example, as a group.
But isn't there other monies for that though? I thought there was another state funds section that's specific for that type of, this is, because this is more on, or was it aligned with kind of the non-for-profit type?
I don't know that we want to provide funding for something like that. That
I
seems like
agree.
something that should be there.
Yeah.
It should be existing. It should not be something that, it seems to me more of a legislative or an IDEM kind of thing that they need to be requiring that.
Right.
We do have a public comment. Kevin, can you unmute Jessie Biggerman so she can provide a comment? She might be under owner Purple O is what she's been chatting.
Oh, okay.
Actually, she should be able to unmute
Oh.
herself. It's,
Jesse, you should be able to unmute yourself.
I can, thank you very much. So, sorry, it was driving me crazy because as the association was part of bringing ReTrack to the state, and Tom certainly then ran with it and we helped Tom, I have actually been part of a group that's across the United States and Canada that has been working with ReTrack on a new program called, I believe it's Insight. I can get the exact information. And the beta test on this will come out this summer. And they are looking for, obviously, people to participate in this. Now, we all know that at some point it will become a cost program, but it would be fantastic if we could lead the way in getting the support for this, because it is the driver for everything that we are talking about. The intention is to truly see where the numbers are coming from, but also who needs it in the downstream. So it's not just meant to be us, you know, collecting general basic recycling information. It can be any information. So when we were talking about the shredding of telephone poles, we would, and the commissioner was mentioning that, we would actually be able to utilize and capture that information. So who is doing that? Who needs it? And it's much more even outside the box thinking than your basic, you know, plastics and aluminum and glass. But it's, so when we talk about the true picture and you talk about the top 100 people, Kelly, which I love that idea, the top 100 manufacturers, I mean, they may be needing something that we don't currently collect. And so all of that would come together with this program. And I know Josh would be thrilled to, if not be able to come in person because he is out of Canada, but certainly speak to this organization about the possibilities of the program anytime, but I'm sure at one of the next meetings, because it is really, I think, going to redesign some of the ways we capture information. Because I think, as Tom will tell you, yeah, we have the basic information, but how does that correlate? And I think one of the problems with the survey that was done was we saw it really doesn't, because once again, for whatever reason, a lot of the private companies feel that that information is proprietary. I have a problem with that in the sense that if that information can truly help with the supply chain, sorry, Craig, that is information that the state needs to have, because the supply chain problems we're having directly correlate with the need for recycling. So the opportunity is there. I don't even think, you know, back to Sandy's point, I don't know that it's necessarily something that the board needs to grant to somebody. I think it's something that the legislature and or IDEM could certainly participate in or fund and see what that looks like across the board as a state or even as an individual business. But Josh would certainly be the best person to speak about that.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you very much. So the next step would be for the board to decide, do you, we had a couple more votes put up, so now K1 has the most at 7. F2 Murph Education Outreach has 5 votes. Regional Murph Shed Development and Support has 4 votes. And then G1, B4 both have 2 votes, and A2 has 1 vote. So does the board want to, the board, I guess, will need to decide, are you happy with that outcome? Do you want to take just a few of those and focus on those? There's 6 of them that have been voted on. So do you want to keep all of them and then use those priorities, you know, within the board, the grant program?
I'd say let's focus on the top 3.
F1 and F2 with the most votes. And I apologize, it's kind of hard to keep track when I can't see the boards. and
I
whatnot.
apologize.
Is that correct?
Yes, K1, F1, and F2 have the most votes. Those are the top three.
What were this next two?
The next two, G1, organics, recycling, including food waste, and B4 to provide funding for zero waste, circular economy, and sustainability plans for communities, both got 2 votes. And then A2, develop survey process for end users, got 1 vote.
And how do you, as a facilitator, expect, I mean, do we focus on a few or many? I mean, what would you recommend?
Well, at this point, you all as a board have voted on how you would like to see the board focus on these recommendations. So we have votes on the table, and so it's really up to you as a board to decide. Do you want to focus on all of them? Do you just want to focus on 3? Is 6 too many? Is 3? You know, do you want to kind of really prioritize the top 3 or 4? It's really up to you as a board, because you are your governing body here, to decide which of these do you want to tackle. You have 3 that have kind of risen to the top pretty substantially, and there's a clear kind of cut between the 3 of them and the other 3.
So what is the board's pleasure? So, yeah.
We had a suggestion for the top 3. And I see heads nodding.
I would agree with that. I agree with the top 3. We've had a lot of discussion about A2, and I, as a board member, feel like there's nothing we can do with that. But if there's some kind of recommendation that we can pass along to our legislators that are involved, that is something important. That has come up in discussion more than once, not just today. I'd like to pass that along to them.
Yeah, and how we voted here today, it's not set in stone by any means. So if, say, for purposes of the grants that you fund, if you want to focus on the top 3, but as a board, you want to, kind of explore more, this A2, the survey process for end users. I mean, that's up to the board.
I don't know that it's something that we can spend time on or need to spend time on. I would feel strongly about providing a recommendation that someone who can do something about it does something about it.
Somebody do it.
I mean, at the end of the day, I think, again, remember, we're limited to $1 million to $2 million
Yes.
of spend. I think to really do that due diligence and that's gonna be a multi-year, could be a multi-million-dollar investment to get teams, assets, people that. I think my personal thing is I like K1. I think F1 and F2, could that be bundled together because you're talking about MRFs, right? So could we kind of bundle those 2 together, and then if you look at K1, and if F1 and F2 are subsets, does K1, F1, F2 create this? Is really, if we focus on K1, K2, does that inherently improve, yes, I agree. Take zero, the definition or the wording of zero waste or waste reduction. Does that do the circular economy, sustainability, and plans for communities? Do those help answer this part? So if it does, then it kind of fixes this. So then can we go into K1, F1, F2 as a subset, and then get to G1, and those are our really 3 main, right? So it's K1, F1, F2 is the same. G1 does the organics, recycling, and with the food waste planning, which actually fixes this. So now it's kind of like we're bundling these ones all together. And then the recommendation for A2 is, listen, we've got only a subset of a finite amount of funding every year of $2 million or $1 million or whatever the government allows us to do. I think those folk, by that subset of dollars, if we can focus on those big items right there, it does all this, and then we can say is, that's my opinion, and I'll hold to it and shut up.
That makes sense.
The Murph Education and Outreach, there's really an avenue for that with the community grants, right?
That's what I'm saying, it kind of fixes.
Yeah.
it.
Well,
So, I mean,
Well,
that's-
it's part of what we fund. That's one of the questions on our,
Yeah, as part, what are you
As our-
doing to educate to
If it's
go
a-
along with this?
If it's a private MRF, though, they would not be able to apply for the community grants.
Yeah.
Just keep that in mind.
Hey, Deanna, I have a question. So I know we've got our criteria, our regular criteria for the RFPs. Is it ever possible to have like like different grants will have, okay, this year we're focusing on X and we're especially encouraging applicants from this type of industry? Is that?
Yes, so that is actually, thank you, Kelly. The next portion that we talked with Geneva about establishing is what we want the next grants to look like with keeping in mind these priorities. And the priorities we've had in the past. It's up to the board if you want to combine them first, but we have 15 minutes of this session. We can always continue it. But that is one of the questions when you want to say what do the grants want to look like next year is, do you want to have priority projects? Who's the audience? Do you want to keep the same audience, or do you want to target a specific audience, stakeholders, or keep in mind the priorities that you just established?
I mean, it might be interesting if we said, hey, in the 2022 cycle, or I guess it'd be the 23 fiscal year, we really want to focus on MRFs and their partnerships, and we could really target the marketing.
I think
And
we
you
gotta
could do it
be
different
careful
ways.
just doing down, even though I love it, yeah, right? But, I mean, good story here is Recycle Works, right? Out of Elkhart.
Yes.
That was a good story there. But we also have had some good stories out of Bloomington and, over in Shelbyville and Morristown with some of those, that organics programs.
Yeah.
And so.
I'm not saying exclude others
Right.
at all. I'm just saying if we said we want to make an extra effort to try and say, hey, we might, you might be an applicant that's a good fit for this program. And I mean, I don't know.
So other states have done it different ways. You can set up SI pools of money for specific grants, or you could do it as a point metrics kind of thing where these are our priority projects. They get 10 additional points on the top, so there's different ways as a board, you could design that so that we're not excluding.
That might be-
But
that
there's
might-
still, maybe we have a focus on a material. This is a discussion that's been had by the board. Some of you guys are new, so I'm just putting that out there for Tara. Would you say, since you've been on it probably, and Kelly.
That might be a great idea if we start getting a lot more applicants than what we can fund. So with this year, we're going to focus on one thing. too.
Yes, at this point, do I have a motion to focus on the particular items, and which items are those?
Is the intention to get motions out of this?
You don't need a motion for this.
I don't think.
I think we're just putting a list together, compiling, saying, hey, this is what we want to attack.
Yeah, I think that we don't need a motion. I'll take these recommendations to start working towards the next RFP.
Okay,
And then we can have an RFP discussion it looks like based on this time frame, we'll still have a large RFP discussion in the next board meeting as well, so.
So backing up just for a second, it sounds like, there's definitely, we've kind of voted them through, but it sounds like in the discussion that's followed, there's interest in really pursuing, there's a way for you all to tackle and pursue the top 5, I would say. So it sounds like you all want to keep the top 5.
I think a lot of it merges, like Craig was saying, it all merges together for the one common goal. And I'm not saying redo the mission or anything like that. It's just when you put it all together, it can accomplish a lot of it. But I also agree with Kelly, when she said the number 3, sometimes you say, okay, hey, let's take 5 or 6. Next thing you know, you're like, crap, we can't pay any attention to 5 and 6. Why do we do 5 and 6? But with Craig's point, if you merge it, I think we can make it happen and be more successful with people we're trying to serve to help us.
Agreed, yes.
Okay, sounds like we have consensus on this first part. We have about 10 minutes left for today.
Yeah. So board, tell me what you think. We can take those recommendations that you guys done and create and modify our priorities a little bit, either modify or add. We can focus on that. And 10 minutes is difficult to get a lot accomplished, so I don't necessarily want to move on. The next step was going to be, what does the next grant RFPs look like, grant round, how, funding. We can choose one item of that you want to focus on if you wanted to do. But,
Yeah, these are the priorities the board came up with in 2019.
right.
And so the question is now, based on these recommendations, do you want to keep these or do they need to change?
Do we want to narrow it down?
You wanna
It's a
narrow it
lot
down?
out there.
Is the,
I just go to the first 4. I like the first 4. And I think it gets.
Deanna, for those of us not in the room, can you read the
Oh, I'm
full?
sorry,
sorry.
I apologize. So the board priorities, I think Deanna's gonna pull them up.
Yeah.
To divert significant tonnage of solid waste from landfills, to promote curbside recycling throughout Indiana, create a better domestic market, support organics recycling, capture more plastic material for the recycling market, analyze cost benefits of recycling and increase education efforts, encourage waste reduction in schools, focus on economic development in distressed areas and job growth, improve the management of electronic waste, develop innovative technologies, and increase awareness of recyclable items.
Thank you.
And I know it's hard to digest that when I'm just reading them.
So you're copying and pasting them into chat, right?
Okay, and we do have a comment.
Yeah, I just have a question. I was actually gonna ask this at the end, because relating back to Commissioner Rockensus's priorities, one of the things he listed was environmental justice and representate. In my understanding, environmental justice means including folks from underrepresented communities on boards like this and in spaces like this where decisions are being made. And I don't see environmental justice show up there. And wondered how that priority would translate to this board and to priorities.
I thought we were talking about PFAS there. When Commissioner Rockman was talking about the environmental justice, it was around PFAS.
I think that was separate.
It was.
There's 2 there too.
Priorities.
So not that anybody has to answer that today, I just noting that there's a bit of a disconnect between Commissioner Rockensus's priorities and then what I'm seeing around the room.
Well, he just came to the game and this stuff was 2019 and this
Yeah.
stuff was made up before, so.
Yeah, I get it.
So I was like, whoa, wait a minute.
No, I think you probably get some of that representation on this board, because we're all throughout the state, and some of us are from some areas that probably experience some environmental justice. So I think you probably, as I'm looking at the folks around the table, I think we probably have some of that representation here.
I'm sorry, I respect what you're saying, but like it's a very monotone room. So there's definitely a lack of representation in terms of racial and ethnic diversity at a minimum. So, I mean, there's definitely economic diversity, absolutely.
And to let you know, the board is a governor appointed position.
Totally understand.
So not under control of item or the board itself as to how it's represented. That's those.
Totally understand.
Yeah.
Also.
But it seems like we could make some recommendations to the governor.
Absolutely.
That is true. Yes.
On the previous board priorities, as I'm looking at this sort of after, whatever, 2.5 years. Is the schools portion, is that now more covered under the other communities grant?
Yes, yeah, I mean, I'd love for you guys to discuss that as one of the items, for sure.
I feel like that's evolved over the course
It has.
of the time that I've been on the board, and maybe that no longer really should be a priority. Not that we would say no to a school, but that there is a separate fund now that.
But there is a very good avenue for schools now in the community recycling grants. So it it's completely your decision of who you allow for applications, but it's not necessary to include schools in the way it was before.
Yeah, I feel like you guys have done a good job of steering them towards that grant where they're much more likely to get the funding that they need. And so I would say that one could probably go away.
Have the colleges been going that route too, the community ones?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, we have received several college applications.
And I would like to keep the develop innovative technology, so I think that's critical.
I think I did have you were asked about the colleges, did have a conversation about that, depending on the size of the grants, the community recycling grants. I think only went up to 100,000 in this last grant round. So if a college was doing a mini MRF or something that required a larger piece of equipment above,
Okay.
that's the only where we may exclude some aspects. Same with solid waste management districts. A lot of solid waste management districts are now applying for community recycling grants because their projects are smaller and more likely to be funded on that community level. However, if there are large projects still dollar-wise that they wouldn't get funding if we chose to change who applies. Because I know, the board, and for those who don't remember, the board originally, the history of the program was strictly businesses, manufacturers, private industry. But when a lot of the other grant opportunities went away for solid waste management districts and education, then the board kind of filled in that gap.
So on the old priorities, I also would like to revisit, analyze cost benefits of recycling and increase educational efforts. It's sort of two things, but I don't remember what we meant when we said analyze cost benefits of recycling. I mean, obviously that's something that's valuable, but in terms of a priority of the board.
My recollection might have been like return of interest on funding projects. Like, is the dollar cost of the project gonna see a benefit in line with the cost of it?
Return of interest.
Yeah. I think. Because some equipment is very, very expensive, right? So you want to see the benefits if you're going to fund that project. And I don't know what are the benefits that the board is looking for this.
Well, and I mean, I don't know, my perspective is that part of what we're doing is helping with some of those upfront costs. As long as we can get the equipment in place to drive the market forward and they have the money to sustain it, ROI is less critical in my mind, that's.
Yeah.
Then going back to the schools, is that something you want to keep, or is that something? Take it off?
And so do we want to add something specific to supporting the MRF sheds?
I think the things that are on there, don't they?
What did you single out plastic?
I think we had a pretty lengthy discussion about the impacts on the environment, the greater impacts on the environment on various recycling streams. And because plastic is so pervasive in our environment and oceans, it became a higher priority to try and capture more of that.
When we had our last strategic planning session and made these priorities, what really came out of it was that we needed to understand the end markets better. And that's why we did the recycling economic infrastructure and economic impact study. It actually came out of this planning session. So I just want to bring that point up. And we had hoped to understand the end markets better and better see what materials we did want to focus priorities on. Did we get that answer in our study? I don't.
I mean, if we were doing this again right now, I probably would say plastic and also glass.
I mean, that's, if you can add glass, if the board, wants to pull out plastics and glass, we can add glass to this, because this is kind of up to the board what you want to prioritize for the next couple of years.
Kind of capture more of everything.
All right, then.
Steel, more.
The more you capture, the more you can recycle. So it's like, I don't want to say don't limit.
And well, it's not saying we're gonna ignore everything else. It was, what are our priorities? What do we want? If we see projects that are chip and wood, is that a higher priority than, recycling glass?
But now we're seeing increased demand on needing more of our other stuff too, so. When production's low and things.
I would agree with Kelly that I believe glass should be one of our points, because I believe, from my experience, there's more recycling of glass going on outside and being shipped back in. And I know there's several companies recycling glass inside the state boundaries, but get more bang for your buck. Obviously, glass weighs more. It's going to have a higher conversion rate just because of the waste as a commodity. Plastics we're picking up where China dropped off, and the end use we can find for the plastics will greatly benefit us.
So I'm just going to interject that it is exactly noon now. So maybe one final consensus on the priorities, if we can come to it within the next minute. If not, then we can table this as well. And we will continue this conversation definitely within the next board meeting.
Does anybody else want to add glass to that particular one?
I put all of them, just like Debbie said, because there's a really increased demand even just for lumber, wood products, even electronics is even, we need to encourage that, because we got companies buying toys to get chips out of things, while the chips be reused, and it's just, right now, our economy is just, they can't keep up. They can't keep up.
Well, if we think it's all of them, then we should just strike it. Because we're not prioritizing anything if we're prioritizing none. I mean, if we prioritize all, we're prioritizing none, that's what I meant to say.
I think if we keep it in there, we have to look, and when we get applications of plastic, that's gotta be more important than the application for cardboard. I mean, if it's a priority, right?
So I hear 2 board members want to prioritize glass, and I have a few over here that want to prioritize everything, so.
I think we need to
strike it.
table it for the
Table
next
it?
quarter.
Yeah,
I think
that's what
I think
came
some
out of
more-
that, exactly.
More thought needs to be put into it, I think.
Okay, yeah.
All right, Bruce, you're gonna have to represent me next time. I won't be here.
Everybody
Oh, bummer.
wish Kelly well. She's gonna be in Ecuador, hopefully.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. I don't want to jinx it.
I will do my best to attend.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for taking the time to have some of the discussion, so.
No, thank you.
I know going through a study is, trying to interpret the study can be a little challenging. Thank you for that word. So, glad to be here today and see you guys soon.
Thank you, Geneva.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Thank you, Geneva. All right, other information, our remaining 2022 schedule. The next meeting will be Thursday, April 28th, 2022. The third meeting will be July 28th, 2022. That is also a Thursday. And the final meeting of 2022 will be Thursday, October 27th.
Bruce, if I could add one thing to the other.
Sure.
Just real quick, board, I shared this at the end of the year, I did a recycling roundtable discussion, trying to bring stakeholders across the state together as well. Helping that mission that we have. I do want to announce that the next session is scheduled for March 16th from 2 to 4, and we'll focus on successful recycling programs. I'm good now.
If anyone was not on that recycling roundtable meeting, it was a very good meeting, Deanna. Thank you so much for pulling that together. Look forward to the next meeting. Any other business? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Again, I apologize for not being as, I guess, involved with the planning, but it was kind of difficult to work through Zoom. We'll try to get better if I need to do Zoom again, but thank you all so very much for your time. Have a good day.
Thanks for.
Thank you.